He was dead, but what awaited him was not darkness, but a truth no one could have imagined, about the US military and the earth. Welcome back to Eternal Bible Stories, and if this is your first time visiting this channel, here we recount the near-death experiences of those who have died and seen the other side. These videos are created to bring hope to a world that sometimes seems hopeless, while also showing people that there is indeed life after death. Today we will listen to the story of a man who died and was taken to a place he never thought could be real. There, he encountered angels, saw the fate of Earth in the future, and most importantly, he was confronted with a choice that would determine his eternal destiny. What he witnessed may shake you to your core and completely change the way you perceive life. Are you ready to hear a truth that will change the way you see the world? The experience I'm about to share with you is a story that happened to me personally in the late 1960s, a story that completely changed my life. At that time, I was involved in a horrific car accident and truly died, but death was not the end. I found myself standing before a radiant golden orb, a powerful being of light. This being gave me a choice. I could go with the Archangels, Michael and Gabriel, or I could follow a dark entity, the one believed to be Lucifer. I did not hesitate. I chose to go with Michael, and from that moment on, I witnessed things beyond human imagination. I was shown visions of the future, including what would happen to Earth just before a new world was born. Be prepared. I had barely managed to get back on my feet when suddenly a massive explosion erupted. The force of it threw me through the air another 20 or 30 feet. As I hit the ground, I tried to get up again, instinctively wiping my face to clear my vision. But no matter how much I wiped, I couldn't get rid of what was blocking my sight. Blood. My blood. In the distance, I started hearing voices. Soft at first, then growing louder and clearer. Lou, baby, come over here, come to us. The voices were strangely angelic, but in that moment all I could think was, no thanks, I've already had enough for one night. I don't need any more surprises. Then I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me up. For a second I panicked until I realized who they were. 5 girls from the party I was supposed to be at. When I didn't show up, they got worried and drove out to find me. It turns out it was their headlights I had seen just before the crash. They had arrived just in time to witness my car flipping, tumbling, and finally bursting into flames. The horror on their faces must have been unbearable. But the real nightmare began when they realized it was my car. All I remember was them shouting, "You better not die on us!" Their panic, their tears, it was overwhelming. I wanted to reassure them somehow, so with the little strength I had left, I managed to lift my hand and give them a thumbs up. It was all I could do. They wasted no time. They scrambled to get me into their car and rushed me toward the base hospital. 3 of them climbed into the back seat, while the other 2 carefully laid me across their laps. The 2 in the front gunned the car forward as fast as they could, and trust me, they weren't holding back. As I lay across their laps, I heard one of them gasp through her tears, "Look, Lou saved Tigger." She had grabbed my stuffed animal, but when she lifted it, she saw the blood pouring from my head again. Her face turned pale, and she quickly abandoned Tigger to press down on my wound instead. Another girl noticed my hand was covered in cuts from shattered glass. Without hesitation, she ripped part of her skirt to wrap around my hand as a makeshift bandage. Even in my dazed state, I was struck by their kindness. Here they were, covered in my blood, their car a mess, yet not one of them cared about any of that. Their only focus was on getting me to safety. Suddenly I found myself sitting upright, looking out the back window of the speeding car. In front of me, the fiery wreck that was once my Mustang was fading into the distance. I looked down and saw 3 girls still crying, frantically shouting at the driver to go faster. Then the realization hit me. That's me, lying on their laps, and there's nobody home." I tried to tell them that I was fine, that they didn't need to panic. I reached out to get the driver's attention, but she didn't react. Instead, she simply told the girl holding my head, "I'm going as fast as I can." It was as if I were completely invisible. Strangely, I felt no pain, no fear. I was just there, with 5 girls in a car racing down the road. When we arrived at the hospital, the 2 girls in the front jumped out like it was a relay race, sprinting inside. I stepped out as well, intending to follow them, but they soon returned with 2 medics and a stretcher. I quietly stepped aside, watching them lift me onto the gurney and rush me into the emergency room. The remaining 3 girls regained their composure and hurried inside. Curious, I decided to follow. No one seemed to notice me, and I wanted to see what was happening. I entered the ER, where doctors and nurses surrounded my body, urgently cutting away my clothes and cleaning the blood. A doctor examined the large hole on the side of my head and began working on it. A medic standing nearby asked if he could stitch up the gash on my hand. The doctor replied indifferently, "Go ahead, he's not going to make it anyway." He mentioned possibly placing a metal plate in my skull, but with the severe blood loss, my chances of survival were slim. A nurse asked if they should call the chaplain. The doctor picked up my military ID tag, reading the words agnostic and blood type O. He shrugged. "I don't think this kid would care, but call him if you want." I found his lack of concern unsettling, as well as the idea of a medic practicing stitching on my hand. I thought, I should complain about this, but as the thought crossed my mind, I realized something terrifying. I was floating upward. I could see myself lying on the operating table, doctors working frantically, but I was no longer in that body. My form became increasingly transparent, hovering above everything. I looked around, even noticing the dust settled on the fluorescent lights in the operating room, and thought, someone really needs to clean this up. Suddenly I heard the doctor say, "Tag him and get him ready. No need for the metal plate anymore." Then he turned to the medic, "Are you done with the hand?" "Yes, sir," the medic replied. "Good. Cover him with a sheet," the doctor ordered. At that moment I fully grasped what was happening. I knew, but I wasn't ready to accept what was coming next. I intended to move toward the girls. They were crying and holding each other tightly, but instead of moving forward, I was being pulled backward and upward. I felt no fear, no sorrow, only curiosity and anticipation for what was to come. I entered a dark tunnel, resembling the Holland Tunnel, but without cars or people passing through. The surroundings were engulfed in darkness, yet not the kind that was terrifying. Instead, a faint light glowed from a distance, as if the sun was shining from the end of the tunnel. As I was drawn toward the light, I carefully observed my surroundings, trying to peer into the deeper, shadowy corners. I saw many solemn-looking individuals, dressed in robes, headdresses, and traditional garments from various religions. They stood along the edges of the tunnel, silently praying. Among them, a man with an Eastern appearance, sporting a long grey beard, sat cross-legged in the middle of the tunnel with his hands clasped together. He looked like a monk, and I assumed he represented one of the religions I had once explored. In the past, I had been a Catholic, but later I abandoned my faith to search for truth in different belief systems, ranging from Mayan and Islamic teachings to the traditions of North and South American indigenous peoples. It seemed as though all were represented here. As I floated past the monk, I had the distinct feeling that he could see me because he appeared to smile as I passed. The others continued murmuring prayers and making gestures as if they were bestowing blessings. I wasn't sure if they were blessing me or the tunnel itself. Strangely, none of them were standing on the ground. They all seemed to be hovering slightly above it. I wanted to stop and ask them who they were and how long they had been here, but I continued being drawn toward the light. From every corner of the tunnel, wisps of smoke rose, carrying a faint scent of incense. I could see and smell everything, yet I felt nothing touch my skin. My feet had never actually made contact with the tunnel floor. It was as if I was floating perfectly in the center of the space. The closer I got to the tunnel's end, the brighter the light became. And then, right in front of me, a vast, radiant emptiness appeared, like a blank canvas, glowing brilliantly, ready to be painted upon. I stood there, waiting for what would come next. In a flash, my entire life unfolded before my eyes, like a film playing in slow motion, frame by frame. Some moments froze for a second before moving to the next. It felt like a test, as if I was being examined to see if I truly belonged here. Just as quickly as it began, it ended. The last scene was my car crashing and bursting into flames. Then, suddenly, I was back, staring into the vast whiteness before me. I glanced down to see my body, only to realize it was no longer there. My once transmitter form had vanished. A thought rushed through my mind. Am I now part of this endless white space? But if I am, where are my thoughts coming from? Before I could make sense of it, a glowing golden orb appeared in the distance, moving toward me. It grew larger, shining with an intensity beyond words. When it stopped just in front of me, about the size of a beach ball, it transformed into a radiant being of pure light. It floated in place, towering over me, taller than any person I had ever seen, broad and powerful, yet perfectly proportioned. Its golden form shimmered, outlined as if drawn with the finest ink. It was not just light, it was living energy. As its shape became more defined, the empty white space around us seemed to come alive. Then other figures appeared. Some had wings, most did not. Some were fully formed, while others were still taking shape. Some looked like floating orbs of colored light, dancing like bubbles in a glass of sparkling water. Overwhelmed with emotions, I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but before I could, the being of light addressed me. Its voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. Not male or female, not loud or soft, not deep or high-pitched. It was simply perfect. I noticed two magnificent figures standing beside it, draped in brilliant capes. The being said, "That is Michael and Gabriel. Michael has chosen you as his, and Gabriel shall teach you the ways." I looked beyond them and saw another figure, beautiful yet darker in contrast. Its flowing robe was deep and vast, and its eyes, though captivating, carried an unsettling intensity. The being of light spoke again. "That is he who has been cast out. You, whom I have given free will, may choose to go with any of them." Without hesitation, I made my choice. Michael had already chosen me, and his presence radiated strength and power. His eyes burned with an intense fire that both drew me in and commanded awe. Gabriel's gaze, on the other hand, was softer, filled with deep understanding and wisdom. These beings are extraordinary, I thought. Finally, I turned back to the being of light. Its eyes were filled with love, warmth, and absolute authority. It acknowledged my choice and said, "You will be my soldier, and you will go with Michael for now. Gabriel will come to you at times. I will send others to you, and when the time of the gathering comes, your fruit shall not fall far from the tree." I didn't know exactly what all of this meant, but I knew one thing: my journey had only just begun. Just then, I saw 5 orbs of light. They seemed to be playing, swirling round and about the being and myself. They had appeared from the outlying landscape, and I noticed they were all the same size and shape, but of different hues, as subtle as shades of rose petals, save one which had a bluish hue. 2 of the pinkish ones seemed exactly alike. The other 2 were yet deeper in shades of red and orange. And before I could ask, it spoke and said, "They, like all here, are of you who are of me, but these will come to you, and you will care for them more. They will fly apart, but come together at the time of the gathering." I thought the being might be telling me these were my children, but I was only 21, and not only had never been married, but had no plans to. I didn't understand how all this was of me, and me of he, when a magnificent crystal serving platter appeared, and it shimmered the colors of many rainbows. In an instant, it shattered into thousands of pieces, each piece brilliant in its own right. Ever so slowly now, all the pieces began to rejoin themselves to form the original serving platter once again. Now I knew what this being of light was showing me. We pieces are the platter. I was just one of those thousands of pieces, as were all those I was seeing here and those back in the world. My mind was still trying to ponder the gathering as I thought about what could this mean. The being answered, "Here you will see the signs that bring forth the gathering," and with that I saw frames appear like screens on a TV set. When I looked into the screens, the visions would gather up, pop off in an image and enter my mind. I felt as if I was being pushed back by its impact. They were only glimpses, but they were so realistic, as if happening right there in front of me in the now. I could not turn away, and then it seemed that I had become a part of each of these visions. There were scenes of men in uniform killing other men in uniforms. I recognized some of the insignias, and some were from the USA. There were also thousands of them not in uniforms, killing even more thousands not in uniform. It was like looking at toy figures moving on their own, mowing down other figures. Different countries, different nations, different religions, different weapons, different decades, but always resulting in hundreds of thousands dead and dying. I wanted out of there. I could feel the pain these people were suffering. I asked the being, why was this, and how long was this to go on? And the being said, man will prey on man until man will pray for man. The next vision was of floods, many of them spilling across the earth on different continents in different seasons, and I am again walking among it, feeling the force and taking in the smell of death. Hundreds of lives and acres upon acres of crops were lost, as well as hundreds of stock and wild animals floating away into the abyss. Then I was watching volcanoes from around the world erupting, first one, then another. The molten lava buried whole towns and villages, and the people and animals within them. I gazed among the ruins and saw little left of what once stood there. The last vision I saw on the screen was of earthquakes destroying sections of almost every continent. One was a massive one in America. Most others were in Europe and the Orient. Again, thousands are killed, structures are crumpled, the landscape leveled. And I turned again to the being, and he said, "There will not only be more of what you have seen, but there will come a time when it will all happen at the same time, and it will come the same time of man's greatest sins." I didn't have time to ask when he said, "They will turn from me and claim themselves like gods." With that, Michael beckoned me to go with him, and I now became part of the universe, novas, suns, planets, all that I looked at from the earth not so long ago, or was it? We traveled toward the beginning of it all, the inner portions of the universe, because zillions of planets around gazillions of suns, and the closer to the center we approached, the more concentrated the number of galaxies. It is like the plate you saw. The largest part, after it shattered, was at the center, and those parts that shattered first were sent the farthest from the center. So is everything in the universe. All is but a circle within a circle, wrapped in a circle. Each level, each dimension, is but a layer of the original, which is without end. I watched as millions of orbs systematically entered the many planets before me. They appeared as bees flitting from flower to flower, pollinating each one after another. Michael took me closer, and I could now see that so many of these planets had life on them, and the orbs were joining with the creatures of these planets. Not every creature was the same on every planet, but they all had some commonalities, a head, a body, and extremities, and the light beings would animate them for a time. We headed away from the center now, and Michael said that Gabriel would have more to explain to me and that he, Michael, wanted me to know that he was pleased with the many times he had called on me to do his bidding, and that I performed my duties well. His parting words were, "You will never again be made to forget." I was journeying back to where I knew Earth would be, and watched as comets and asteroids casually passed by me, or I passed them. The colors of the gaseous cloud formations were striking. I started looking at these infant galaxies as one would cloud formations back on Earth, imagining what shape they were taking on. This one a boat, this a bird with wings, this a scarf floating in the breeze, till I recognized what was the constellation Orion, and I knew I was getting close to my destination. I noticed two blazing celestial bodies racing parallel to its center, looking like twin arrows exiting from an archer's bow and heading straight for the blue marble of home. Immediately, a vision of millions of people crying because of the devastation of portions of New York City came to me. I became aware of a strange feeling I had not known previously, and I thought that might be because this was the city I had grown up in. I saw a huge earthquake, a magnitude of 8.6, in some place named Eureka. A ham operator or radio announcer was directing thousands of people migrating from areas of frequent disasters to places of safety. A space station appeared to be falling from the heavens because of an internal explosion. Missiles were being simultaneously fired into space from several nations. I thought the light being had shown me all there was to see, but these were different, stronger, and there was no pre-screening as before. Gabriel appeared beside me, I thought because I had felt shaky, but he was to explain the now sprawling galactic view of my galaxy. The sun was expanding and spewing off huge ectoplasma balls, more than it had ever done in its past, and in the very direction the planets would orbit through. I could not take my eyes off the Earth as I watched what effect these eruptions would have on the Earth. A large mass passed me, larger than any of the planets known to me, and as it passed I saw the Earth wobble wildly, as would a top toward the end of its spin. The rotation stopped and slowly started again, but it was tilted now, and I was drawn in closer, like the zoom of a lens. The ash clouds that had engulfed the Earth thinned, and, like a tack-welded piece of metal being dismantled, I could see the ocean bodies starting to rise. First the Pacific along the Ring of Fire, then the others, synchronistically. As the waters shifted upon the land masses started to sink under the waters, adding pressure to them. When the pressures equaled the spin of the changing axis, the Earth no longer looked as it did moments before. It was newer, cleaner, and more beautiful, with darker greens and lighter blues. Some of the new land masses looked similar to a few of the other planets I'd recently visited with Michael. People were on this Earth and appeared happier and more content, although seemingly living like the native populations of old. Cities built by the ancient ones that were buried beneath the oceans were now being populated by the surviving people in this new world. I saw tribes joining tribes in small nations forming, but it was what I didn't see that made my heart burst. There were no more wars. True peace and happiness had finally befallen mankind. Gabriel now tells me that this is his message that I must take back, to let others know that there is little to fear, for the Earth will go on forever, as did all the planets I had visited. I am to tell the world to look to the heavens, and they will know when the new world will come upon them. I asked him, what of the others there on Earth during the change? Gabriel told me that all would be lifted. Some will be lifted higher than others and no longer enjoy the physical plane, while some will be left on the Earth to replenish and rebuild the physical. They too will be of a higher elevation than any that are living there now. I was now before the light being of gold again. Those 5 orbs were still darting about. I wanted to stay and explore this realm with all the other light beings, but I was told I could not. I was brought here to go back, to tell the others who would be coming after me that if they would spread the love they brought with them to the physical world, they would know their Creator eagerly awaits them. The being told me that, should I ever have questions of the heart or mind, he will answer them, if I only look within myself, for that is where he will dwell. From this time forward, I need only think it to be so, and it will be so, for I will forever know the truth. I was told there was much work left undone, and that he had set a road of rocks before me that I must sweep away for passage. Many will be set before me, so that I may help in my presence, and more I will not. But that I must not set aside wrongly, for a soul should not be lost within my heart. I asked, how will I know? And before I received an answer, I was being whisked away through that darkened tunnel like a dust bunny in a vacuum, with about as much control as a runaway train. I awoke to a nurse scrubbing the encrusted blood off of the right side of my head. My body was racked with pain. I screamed at the nurse for what I felt was her lack of compassion, and she had a shocked look on her face. "Oh my God, welcome back, sailor. We thought you were a goner for sure." I asked her, where was I, and how long had I been here? And she answered, "You've been in a coma for 7 days now. They thought you died on the operating table and were going to ship you to the morgue when the assisting corpsman noticed some movement under your sheet and rushed you back to the operating room. The doctor checked you out, and he was amazed to find your vitals were returning to normal, but what floored him was the hardened crust that had formed over the hole in your head seemed to have sealed most of the damage. He decided he didn't even have to put a steel plate in your head anymore, as it had healed sufficiently on its own in the time you were gone." I said, "You mean that practicing corpsman who was sewing my hand in the operating room saved my life?" She said, "Yes, but how did you know he was sewing your hand? You were unconscious the entire time you were in the operating room and never came to until just now." If she had only known all the things I knew from that time, she would have surely gone into shock. I took the brush and towel from her hands and said I would finish the job for her, and she thanked me and said she was going to notify the doctors that I was conscious. I looked across the dorm and saw several sailors and a Marine lying in their prospective beds. The Marine looked familiar and was situated closest to me. He smiled and said, "Hey, Mr. Chuck," a handle I picked up overseas. "You missed a hell of a party last week." I replied, "So I am told, but you should have seen the one I went to. It was a real mind-blower." He told me I made the local papers, and a picture of what was left of my car was photographed and on the second page of the news. Then he said, "I bet you're glad they are going to sign your discharge papers and not your death certificate like they almost did." I joked and said, "Yeah, you know those Navy doctors. In and out, they'd sign anything to get their liberty passes." The doctor finally arrived and started to check me out. He seemed genuinely interested yet amazed at my seemingly miraculous recovery. He told me I was a medical miracle. Not only was I not supposed to still be alive after the massive blood loss, but the mental trauma of my head injury would at the least make me a vegetable. He also said that the injuries to my legs and arms alone should have kept me in the infirmary for another 2 to 3 weeks. Yet there I was, everything working fine, actually as good as new, not even any black and blue marks to show what my body had been through. He said he had to admit it was truly a marvel, and when I asked if I could be returned to active duty, he said he really couldn't see why not. He signed my hospital discharge papers, and I was returned to my squad the next day. It was good to be among the living, but I knew where I had been was a far, far better place than any place here on earth will ever be again. I remembered everything that happened to me in that other place, but spoke none of it to anyone, because just the mention of having been dead was enough to make people twirl their fingers near their head when they thought I wasn't looking. And sometimes I wasn't looking. But I knew this was one of the most amazing accounts that I have ever had the pleasure of narrating. His ending sentence is what I have been speaking about over and over. Those of us who have had NDEs and tell people we died in our stories People do seem to believe we are crazy. If I had my way about it, I wish that everyone alive would get a chance to experience an NDE anyway. Sorry about the tangent. I want to know what everyone thought of this experience. Let me know in the comments section below. I would also like to point out that the person who experienced this rejoined the light a few years ago. Rest in peace, Lou. I believe that you did fulfill your assigned task. See you all in the next video.